and strategy.
Okay, all right. And then final question before I go to James. Can you give us an overview about other internet exchange points in the world or in the region? Where does Uganda stand?
Are you asking me or James?
I'm asking you before I go to James. The last question.
I see. Okay, right. So Uganda's actually doing quite well regionally. The sort of value of an internet exchange is the number of networks it has connected to it, not really the amount of traffic going through it. And we have 28 networks connected, and that's made us very attractive to content providers and others that need efficient distribution points for their services in Uganda. There's a lot of other internet exchanges throughout the region that are doing similarly well, but there's also a lot that are struggling, and it's not entirely up to the internet exchange. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, as the UIXP that we're like better than some that aren't doing as well. There's a whole host of ecosystem issues. You know, like, does your government have policy in place that facilitates competition in the telecommunications industry? You know, like, is there access to good metro fiber? You know, all these things are sort of important for internet exchanges to come up and thrive. So in Uganda, we've had liberalized telecommunications policies for decades now, since the 90s. Uganda was one of the first countries in Africa to liberalize its telecommunications sectors. And that's been a very good thing. And that's led to the kind of growth that we've seen for our internet exchange, for stuff like C Squared. You know, now James is developing a carrier neutral data center. And all these things couldn't have really happened without that sort of liberalized policy ecosystem to begin with, you know, plus being a fairly attractive foreign investment destination and everything else. But globally, of course, in terms of the globe, Africa's the fastest growing region for internet exchange points. There's, I think, about a terabit of traffic going through internet exchange points around Africa right now. Most of that, of course, is in South Africa.
Right.
But still, I mean, across the region, we're seeing growth in the amount of traffic flowing between networks, which is what we want to see, because that means more of this traffic is originating within Africa. And that means we're less dependent on the cables going to the rest of the world. Globally, you know, we're not quite in competition with some of these European or Asian, you know, internet exchanges yet. The largest internet exchanges in the world are DKIX in Germany, AM6 in Amsterdam, Links in London, and they're doing enormous amounts of traffic. But you know, for obvious reasons, you know, it's not really a fair comparison. But we're doing quite well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kyle. I think we'll move on to James now. And as James introduces himself, I'd like him to also maybe give us some insight on why Africa is one of the fastest growing internet exchange points, touching just on the key areas of growth on why internet use is growing in Africa and also in the region, coming down to Uganda.
First of all, I hope my audio is clear because I keep toggling between different devices.
It's clear.
It's good. Okay. Yeah, hi, my name is James Byaruhanga. I think the audience here mostly know me. But for those who see the recorded bits, and yeah, Kyle, I'll ask you at the end of this all to sort of reintroduce yourself, because I sort of started recording her for another tech issue on my side. Anyway, yeah, so I'm a network engineer by profession and mostly IP networks. I've done this for about 22 years now. I've been involved in quite a lot of the evolution of internet in Uganda, mostly because I started my career in the service provider space when internet was sort of just kind of unfolding. Like Kyle was saying, in the past, we had most of the breakout of internet in the beginning going through specific satellite solutions, UTL being one of them. Then later, the ISP industry started taking off. I think the first ISP was Swift Global. Then after Swift Global, there was I think Infocom came up around that time, or is it Infomail at the time? And then yeah, so there was an evolution. Shortly after that, then I think Swift Global sold off to Africa Online, and I joined Africa Online, so I was kind of involved in the early stages of internet evolution in Uganda. After that, I did some time in Ghana with Africa Online, then I worked with MTN Uganda, did some time in MTN Group, and then together with a couple of friends, we started Block Telecom about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and now I'm leading the team that's building the first private carrier neutral data center in the country. So I've kind of been around the industry for a while. It's exciting, first of all, that we're doing this with the UIXP, because it's I think it's a natural progression. The UIXP has to grow as well. Kyle gave you the history of the IX and where it's been operating for a while, and even in that same building, it's moved from room to room. The UIXP today is not what it was in the beginning. This has been a massive step ahead in terms of capacity. It's grown maybe 100-fold from the first year or first 2 years or 3 years. So it's already grown significantly. So yeah, it's exciting that we are actually working together to see that the UIXP moves into or extends into a bigger facility where it can grow another 100-fold, so to speak. Paul was asking about why Africa is currently one of the fastest growing markets or traffic patterns in UIXP. I believe it's a bunch of reasons. The first one is, of course, device penetration is increasing steadily in Africa, probably much more steadily than most of the other regions in the world. This is a reason of coverage. It's universal access by networks. It's national operators coming through, but more so is that the demographic is mostly youth, and it's beginning to shift from just being primary school students to rather secondary students and university students and working class students who can now afford some handsets. So, and also they have a big appetite for consuming data and keeping up with trends. So there's been a significant growth in internet penetration, internet utilization, and consequently, this leads into a significant growth in utilization of the UIXP itself. As Kyle mentioned, the IX is basically that one location where networks connect to each other and exchange traffic, preferably local traffic. But also, like you mentioned, it's another location where you find content providers connect to local networks. So with this growth in population, growth in utilization of data and growth in devices, then you're able to see a very interesting trend where now guys are beginning to push and pull out a lot more traffic. So that's basically the trend that we're seeing in the African internet markets, and it's a trend that's going to keep growing as we go ahead. I don't know if that kind of addresses the high level of it.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And now, James, I'd like you to just sort of like connect the growth with regards to internet exchange and the need for a data center before now we go into the Raxio and the UIXP deal. What's the connection between the two? Growth in internet and need for a local data center in Uganda?
Well, let's put it this way. Is that either of them can exist without, well, each can exist without the other, but it's a lot better when they exist together. Now, let's just quickly go back into what data centers are, and then we can tie in what Kyle explained as what an exchange point is, and then we see how the two of them kind of work together, right? So, all right. Technically, you find that you can have a standalone internet exchange point like we have right now, which is basically a nice, like a switch, a network switch, where you'll have people connect their different devices and configure some kind of intelligence to exchange traffic between each other on through that switch. That's not as efficient as it should be. So what, for example, we have now with the Internet Exchange Point in Uganda is that you'll have some level of intelligence there to kind of improve the quality of how those packets or that traffic is exchanged. And then you can try and grow it from that independent location. It works fine. Of course, with scalability issues, which is basically it can grow to a given extent and get limitations, but for a start, it works. And that's what, and currently we have that kind of growth with the current Internet Exchange Point. Now, data centers, on the other hand, also can work independently. And historically, in the country, we've had the telcos having their own facilities for their own requirements, and then some of them trying to think forward and say, if we have some extra space, we can lease it out to whoever is interested. However, that also has limitations because of the absence of neutrality, so to speak, because it's still the telco's data center, and the primary need is still the telco's needs or service providers' needs. So while the neutral data centers come in and play a very big role, is that they're open to everyone. They're open to all the telcos, they're open to all the carriers. By carriers, I mean like fiber cable providers, submarine cable providers, international data wholesale providers, voice providers, cloud providers. It's open to all of them to be able to basically jump in there and bring their capacity. Now, when you start getting a lot of what you'd say content carriers and content seekers meeting in the same room because of the neutrality this provides and because of the fact that it's a purpose-built infrastructure or machine with stable power, stable connectivity, good temperature in terms of cooling, humidity control, fireproofness, security, all those different things. It's purpose-built to be that kind of environment. The only thing that you really want to facilitate or catalyze the existence of the tenants in there is an Internet Exchange Point. The reason is because the Internet Exchange Point now provides or facilitates what we call cross-connect or interconnect. So the people who are sitting in this room or in this building, they're not sitting there purely because they just want to have a remote location to put their servers. What is driving them is also what else? Who can they connect to? How will they connect back to the head office? What extra content do they need that is already sitting within this building? Now, that's where the Internet Exchange Point comes in. Because the main point of an Internet Exchange Point is keeping local traffic local. That's usually how we used to define it. Try and keeping local traffic local. Obviously, one is cheaper, it's faster, and it's more efficient. Now, when you basically bring that Internet Exchange Point into the same building with all this other content, whether it's content providers or content seekers, you complete the puzzle because now they can connect to each other and start benefiting from all these advantages of cost, of efficiency, of speed in terms of being able to exchange this content with each other. Now, what makes that the UIXP and Raxio sort of like a match made in heaven, because now suddenly all these 28 networks Kyle talked about are suddenly available to connect to everyone else who will be in Raxio. Now, because of this, it will force or kind of drive an interest from international players who are looking, one, for the local market, and also looking to improve the experience of the local consumer, basically whoever it is that's utilizing the internet in Uganda. So that's how they kind of plug into each other.
Okay, all right. Kyle, back to you. When your members hear or heard of this news, the deal between Raxio and yourselves, what are some of the thoughts that your membership had, and most especially, how do they benefit from such a deal?
Well, I mean, we got some positive feedback. We don't typically get tons of feedback on the things that we do. I mean, everybody's focused on their businesses, and I think they take note of the news and move on with that in mind. But the feedback that we did get was very positive. I mean, there's networks that really rely on local interconnection now, and there's a lot of networks who really want to see the Raxio Data Center be successful, like us, because you know content needs somewhere to live if it's going to be in Uganda, and content is not going to go into data centers owned by carriers. So, you know, the Raxio carrier neutral data center is a really good thing, and we all want to see it thrive. We've all got a sort of symbiotic relationship with it. So we got very positive feedback. And I think that that's going to be realized when all of this actually gets implemented. It'll take some time for the effects to occur. It's not like we're just going to switch the system on and, you know, sunshine and rainbows is going to come down from the sky. But, you know, over the course of, you know, a year or two, you'll see dramatic improvements in the quality and cost of the internet in Uganda, so long as, you know, market conditions generally remain competitive.
You had spoken about peering. Can you maybe shed some more light about that?
Yeah, peering is the activity. Peering is when two networks agree to exchange traffic without charging each other for it. You can have a couple different types of relationships. You can have relationships where one network pays another for their traffic because maybe you're a small internet service provider and you need access to the global internet. So you go to some big company like Liquid Telecom and you say, I'm going to pay you for access to the global internet. Or you can have a relationship where you guys, the two networks agree that they are approximately the same size, or the traffic they exchange is of equal value, or whatever. And then it's just more efficient and good for everybody if they freely exchange the traffic. Some examples of why that would be a good thing is when internet exchanges start up in many countries, you start with an environment where one network or a couple networks are very dominant and they sell internet to all the other smaller providers. And the smaller providers don't want to pay that big network for the traffic between them. So they set up a switch between them and they agree to freely exchange traffic between each other. And that way the only bits that they pay for is the stuff that has to go to the rest of the internet through that big incumbent. Just to give you an example of how the dynamics work. So in Uganda, like I said, we've got 28 networks connected and more or less all of them freely exchange traffic with each other. There are some cases where networks don't interconnect with specific networks through our infrastructure because, for example, a big network might not want to freely exchange traffic with one of its customers. And so if one of the networks is buying the internet from that network might not choose to also freely give them, you know, part of the service. So there's some commercial realities that kind of affect which networks want to interconnect and peer with each other. But generally in Uganda, all of these 28 networks are freely exchanging data between each other. And just to go back to James's point before about content and the purpose and relevance of the data center and how it affects the market. You know, before James's data center, we had this internet exchange. And then that made Uganda a really great place for these content providers like YouTube and Facebook to come deploy equipment because they can put one piece of equipment in our facility and touch 28 networks. That's really good for them, right? But at some point, you know, we don't have the kind of space, and nor are we the type of business where we're renting rack space, right? We're just an internet exchange. We don't want to be in the business of doing a data center, nor do we have one. And so content needs somewhere to live. So if we can be an attractive country now for content, but if it's got nowhere to live, nowhere to be hosted, like James's data center, Raxio, then it's worthless, that attraction, because they've got nowhere to go, right? And to make the distinction, yes, we've got data centers from MTN and we've got data centers from others, but we don't want to be in those data centers, and neither do the content providers, because typically a network like MTN, just to use them as an example, there are others, I don't mean to slag them off, but a data center owned by a network operator will typically try to force you or encourage you to use their network infrastructure or their services when you're in the data center. And so if we were to try to go in there as an internet exchange, it would be difficult for us to attract other networks to connect to us. And if you're Google and you need to connect to all the other networks in the country, it's going to be hard to do that through that facility. And so that's why Raxio's data center being carrier neutral is really important, because they're not owned by a particular network and they have policies that are deliberately incentivized to be neutral in the way that they deal with the infrastructure providers, the fiber providers coming in, the networks that want to sell services or get services in their facility. And they're not trying to steer the market in one direction or another to benefit their network services, because they're not a network. right? And so that's perfect for us. That's perfect for our customers, you know, like YouTube and Facebook. And it's just, this is the way that it really works best in most markets.
Okay. James, turning back to you, when your current clients, I know you've signed up a couple of them and the others up on schedule. What was some of the feedback that you got from your current and potential customers of this when they heard about this deal? And maybe for those who are listening, who are not yet on, how can others benefit from such a deal?
Okay, so basically, the nature of the business we do is the commercial side requires pre-sales, sort of like real estate business, to kind of have tenancy on day one, because obviously the equipment was installed and it's up and running. You need to have people starting to utilize the infrastructure you built immediately. So the customers who we have on board, like let's say the carriers, for them this is a massive plus. It's a big justification of why they must come, for starters, because usually their big issue is if we get into this facility and there's no exchange point or no access to an exchange point, is we will have to spend extra money on connectivity from the data center all the way to the exchange point to be able to again exchange traffic with their inevitable say customers or peers, so to speak, like other carriers who they would rather have an efficient bilateral type of arrangement with. Now, also what is interesting for them is connectivity to these content providers that Kyle mentioned. Someone like YouTube, for example. So YouTube right now is sitting at the UIXP. If YouTube wants to increase their deployment, let's say the current environment might not allow them to because of the space limitations, like Kyle mentioned. If Google wants to deploy for much bigger services rather than just maybe YouTube, they would have the same challenge because, again, they don't have maybe the scalability environment that they require. But what we found more interesting is now the enterprises, the big enterprises who have started to grow to a level where they feel like they would like to also exchange their traffic directly with service providers. So basically they would like to peer directly with service providers without going through third parties, which is a problem that maybe the UIXP has right now because of scale limitations. But now they can basically be able to deliver that service and allow enterprises to peer directly with each other or to peer directly with the UIXP, which in turn means they can peer with service providers. And I guess the question would be, why would an enterprise want to peer? So if you look at someone like, I think URA is already peering directly with the UIXP. I'm not sure, I think National Water is not peering directly.
Not National Water, but we also have NITA, and then they provide connectivity to a lot of the other agencies.
Yeah, so you find government agencies, for example, provide public-facing services. So if you want to have your national ID processing online, whether it's like for purposes of like KYC for a SIM card or an internet service or banking banking procedures like checking for someone's financial card, passport control. So all these services would be very difficult. Okay, they're not difficult, but they are much more complicated if you have to jump hoops to get the traffic across the other side. So you find like NITA will carry government services into the UIXP, right? Some other enterprises like banks will decide that I want to peer directly because my customers are using internet banking from across different ISPs. So me, I'll peer directly with Internet Exchange. Someone like Visa or MasterCard would find it interesting because all the banks are using their service and currently they're probably peering with them over the internet. Now, this is something that can be, the performance can be improved significantly if you have a local peering point. If you look at the model that, for example, InterSwitch uses, a bunch of small banks basically use the same ATM infrastructure, right? this is something that that should not just be limited to interswitch banks. It should be something that should be working for all banks. There is really no point in having 10 ATM machines in one corner in a mall, for example.
Yeah.
All these guys should be able to kind of like sort of use the same infrastructure to deliver banking as a service, a remote service, not to use ATM presence as a competitive advantage. Because at the end of the day, I think what the bank is interested in is extending service beyond infrastructure to the customer.
Yeah.
So these are things that can be made very, very possible when enterprises start exchanging traffic or peering with each other. And so when you start to think about it as the end user, this stuff works and affects you directly as a consumer. You see a lot of things that we do, we don't even realize that we are switching traffic. Using platforms like booking.com, which is you use for your flights, you use it for your hotel accommodation, apartments, sometimes taxis. All this stuff is kind of, it requires points of integration. Your Ubers of this world, Airbnb, they should be peering directly into the IX to kind of keep this traffic local. So that's generally the response we got was that suddenly these guys can start to scale. For the ISPs, it's a no-brainer. It feels like, first of all, we have a second location. In case we have a problem on the primary location and there's like power, that power is out or there's a riot, whatever it is that might make me uncomfortable, or my fiber cable is cut, I have a second location now that I can actually peer with. So those are kind of like the feedback points that we received.
Okay.
Kyle, I don't know if you want to jump in there on the same issue.
Yeah,
I think you covered it well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
No. Saying I was about to ask you the same thing. If you can add on to what James said, especially with the primary and the secondary locations that are going to be available now.
Right. So as we talked about in the beginning of the call, it's probably worth reiterating. What we plan to do is extend our peering infrastructure from town into Raxio, which means they'll be interconnected. And that means that if a network is connected over here at our current location, they'll also be reachable from Raxio because we're going to have a link between them. So they can choose to peer at only one location and still touch networks at both locations. Or they can choose to be at both in case they need a redundant service, right? So what that means is a couple things. It means that, you know, these 28 networks that are currently peering over here at our primary location now will all be reachable from Raxio's data center on day one. So if you have a content provider or you're a bank or you're a network operator of some kind that's not currently connected, now you'll be able to come into Raxio's data center and with a single connection to our infrastructure, you'll be able to directly peer with 28 other networks, right? And the same thing is true, of course, in reverse. So that's obviously a very attractive thing potentially for customers in the data center. And it's very attractive to us because it allows us, makes it easier for us to sort of expand our membership base, right? The more networks we have connected, the better it is for us. And primarily, you know, Raxio's targeting a lot of enterprise customers, and we think that's an interesting new place to, an interesting new segment for us in terms of trying to attract networks. There are some very large enterprises that would benefit from peering, and those will be in the data center.
All right. Kyle, you had earlier mentioned in the in your talk and also in the press release that this deal is basically going to help lower the overall cost of network service delivery. My question is, how and when does the customer benefit in this cost reduction?
So all this peering activity and this free exchange of data lowers the cost of network traffic flowing within Uganda generally. And as content networks plug into our peering infrastructure, more of what people do online comes through our infrastructure. So, you know, right now we have YouTube connected as one of our peers, and YouTube pumps a lot of video data into the internet ecosystem in Uganda through our infrastructure. along with a lot of other networks and providers that are hosting different bits of content. And as that amount of traffic grows, that becomes an increasing percentage of the overall amount of traffic going through the networks in Uganda. And because it's a much cheaper, more efficient way for those networks to get that traffic, it means that their operational costs, the amount that they have to pay for internet overall and then mark up and sell to you, that input operational cost goes down because a growing percentage of their internet traffic comes through us. And it's much cheaper and faster than getting it from the international transit links that they have. So as those costs go down, they have room to play with their prices more. And in a competitive environment, so long as Uganda remains a competitive ecosystem, that means that at some point, these networks trying to gain customers or a new one entering the market or somebody is going to lower their prices, right? It may not drop like a rock all in one day, but these guys are going to start competing against each other. And so there's a delay from when, you know, the cost of the network operators goes down from peering to when they pass it on to the customer. But Uganda right now is a very competitive space. There's a lot of network operators and choices out there for consumers. And so the rate of decrease on the retail side is as efficient as I think it could be. And so right now we're in a pretty good space. You know, I can't give you like a time frame, you know, how long it's going to take, but it's a gradual process and it'll happen over time. But it will happen dramatically because the amount of internet traffic coming from peering in Uganda is growing substantially. And this deal that we have with Raxio is very likely to accelerate that.
Okay, James, would you want to add on to that?
Yeah, these are interesting graphs, actually. For those on the call, just to jump in, James, you're muted, by the way, but I'm looking at these are our graphs of traffic. You'll see that right now they're about 8.8 gigabits per second on a regular basis. Typically, before coronavirus, we were up to 11 gigabits per second going through our traffic. In 2009, I think we were doing 10 megabits. And now we're doing over 10 gigabits. The reason why we're doing a bit less now is because of this lockdown. And it's kind of an interesting side conversation because in a lot of the rest of the world, you're seeing internet exchange traffic growing due to the lockdown because more people are using their home internet connections and more of that traffic is going through exchanges. But because of the particular configuration of Uganda's internet ecosystem, we've seen a traffic reduction. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's an interesting side conversation.
Yeah, so Paul, my contribution to this was basically I wanted Kyle to kind of use this graph to explain to the guys who are following, show them what the trends are. If you look at the year graph, for example, I wish we had like a 10-year graph, but obviously that's a bit it's a bit pushing it. But if you look at the year graph, you'll see a very steady growth. This traffic continues to grow significantly by the year. And if you had looked at these graphs a few years ago, you wouldn't be able to see where we started. The graphs would be on zero. So yes, I fully agree with what Kyle is saying. That's happening. We were having another side conversation on this, and I was joking that well, I wasn't joking really, but I think one of the key things that I see out of here is that there's about 3 gigs of traffic dropped because of this corona issue. But I think that really shows you that guys are actually using most of the internet in the office rather than at home. And probably a lot of guys are just on YouTube while at work instead of working on Netflix. But well, anyway,
one of the other interesting things that's happening from my observations is that now that people are home, they're on these mobile networks, and the mobile networks often have their own YouTube caches built into their network because Google will put caches inside the largest network operators. And so that YouTube traffic that they're now maybe still doing at home just as much as they were at the office is hitting the on-net caches inside MTN and Africell and whatever instead of hitting our cache because they're not doing it at the office on the fixed IXPs. They're now doing it on the mobile networks, which have their own deployments. And I think that's another big thing that's occurred.
Yeah. Okay. Let me translate this for non-techies here. So guys, and this is really, really important to pick out as a very big advantage of having internet exchange points and having networks connect to them, is that when you deploy what we call a cache server, which is basically a piece of equipment that remembers what the browsing history has been. So what happens is, if, for example, now there is a video that suddenly goes viral, right? I think lately there's been a video of this random, I think, Kenyan girl dancing. So when it's opened by one person, that copy sits on that server. So the next person who comes on and opens it, it does not necessarily have to pick it from their source, which is international. They'll pick it from the nearest server, which is basically sitting at the Internet Exchange Point. Now, we have a unique scenario in Uganda because the Internet Exchange Point took some time to grow to this scale, and some of the private networks basically grew faster than it. So you find like MTN will have their own server for their customers. UTL would have one for their own customers. Airtel will have one for their customers, meaning that all the utilization is not centralized. Now, this, you're seeing this 8 to 9 gigs that we are seeing right now on the graph. This probably is half the capacity that we should be seeing, or even it could even be a lot more if all those networks were going through the same centralized point. So what Kyle is explaining is that part of the traffic that we're not seeing going through the Internet Exchange Point is going through the mobile devices, because probably even all you guys who are online right now are using your mobile devices, not fixed networks who appeared directly. So yes, the network has a right to sort of choose what they pick from the IXP and what they don't. If they have their own in-house server, they will probably do that. Now, the other advantage that we foresee will come with deployment of Raxio Data Centre as well as the IXP and Raxio Data Centre is that maybe these content networks will not be deploying shell deployments. They'll be bringing in much bigger deployments than they have currently. So most of them usually deploy like different types of nodes, which are edge nodes, or some are, we call them stacks. So they can bring in a small stack because of how much space do they have to work with, how much traffic are they pushing through. But when they get confident in a given market, and I'm talking about the big players, your Amazons, your Microsoft, Facebook, Google, they will put in much bigger deployments. Now, when they put in much bigger deployments, it starts to kind of push these guys who have these other boxes in their networks to look towards the bigger deployment, because there is a lot more savings for them and there is a lot more efficiency. Then you start to see these graphs spike up. So maybe I'll just show you guys an example of what another Internet Exchange Point looks like. In the meantime, I think Kyle could probably explain a little bit more about the advantages of like a much larger deployment from a CDN to a market.
Well, so yeah, one of the things I want to clarify though is that remember earlier how I was saying that the measure of an Internet Exchange Point's value is the number of networks connected to it and not the traffic flowing through it. One of the reasons for that is because content networks, for example, even if the Uganda Internet Exchange Point was the first one to get a YouTube cache, they would ultimately put caches in all of the other networks once those networks had enough traffic to justify it. Content companies are constantly trying to get closer to the user. So what you'll see happen, regardless of who gets one first, is that they'll start maybe at an internet exchange in a small market to promote the YouTube service by improving its performance and reducing the cost of delivering that traffic. And then a mobile network operator's traffic will grow and grow and grow. And at some point, Google, YouTube will decide, okay, that network now qualifies for its own cache. And so what you'll see when that happens is the internet exchange's traffic will drop substantially, because all of that traffic is now on network coming from the cache that the network just got. But it's actually a sign of the Internet Exchange Point's success, because it was the Internet Exchange Point that facilitated that traffic growth to the point where the network justified an on-network deployment. And similar effects will occur when you see these gigantic things, these gigantic deployments that will occur in Raxio. Initially, you'll see a traffic increase on the Internet Exchange. But then what will happen is one of two things. As traffic from those large deployments grows to particular networks, those particular networks will either get a cache, like I was explaining before, which takes traffic away from the exchange, or YouTube will make a cross connect to that network at the data center, which will also take that traffic off of the exchange. Because at certain volumes, it might be more economically efficient for them to make a cross connect than to use the internet exchange. And they might also not want a third party like us between such substantial traffic flows. So there's a lot of economics and internet dynamics around why that occurs. So I'm just bringing this up because a lot of people look at internet exchange points and measure them by traffic. And that's really not an effective way to do it, because low traffic can actually be a sign of success. So it's really important to look at the number of connections. But those larger deployments are going to make a big difference, because right now what's happening with these caches is somebody has to pay for the bandwidth going into them, and that's usually not the providers in small markets. But our market has now grown to the point where they're going to be able to justify bigger deployments in Raxio's data center, for example. And when they typically do that and make those kinds of investments, they want to control the input bandwidth going into those deployments themselves and typically pay for it themselves, which means that you don't have all the economic problems of networks trying to compensate someone for the provision of that cache fill. And I'm using a lot of technical language, and I'm hoping our audience is following. But the larger deployments that are going to happen in Raxio are going to solve a lot of problems. It's not just that there's going to be more content actually sitting in Uganda. It's also going to be the economics that are going to change in a way that's going to streamline the distribution of that content through the exchange, cross connects, and in other ways.
Okay. Kyle, you mentioned one of the big tech companies being connected to UIXP, and that was YouTube. Maybe for the audience's sake, why would YouTube be connected to Uganda, and what are the reasons for that demand? And maybe also James can highlight that, and maybe perhaps also highlight which are the bigger companies or content companies that are trying to connect to Uganda, and then just shed some light with regards to that interest.
So YouTube has a problem. They distribute an enormous amount of data. Videos are not cheap, right? That's a lot of bandwidth that they need to send around the world. So if all those videos were sitting in some data center in California and they had to ship them around the world, one, the performance would suck. Tons of money, or somebody would be spending tons of money on delivering that content because of the economics of sending it all around. So what they did is they came up with a system where they can distribute the hosting of that content. So they came up with these systems that keep track of what's popular, like James was talking about before. And then they put those systems in countries like Uganda. So next time, Nicki Minaj comes out with a new music video, we don't have to pull it down 1 million times from Europe to show it to 1 million people. We can pull it down once into that system and it can get distributed 1 million times from our room. And because it only has to go over last mile infrastructure from the internet exchange to the user through MTN or Africell or whoever, there's a lot of bandwidth available there. And so these videos can be distributed in high definition, and the quality and performance increases, which drives more people to use services like YouTube. So it's a competitive advantage for people like Google who own YouTube, and it's also about efficient distribution and cost.
Okay. James?
Okay, first of all, I hope you guys are not yet totally lost, but it's fine. We'll keep trying to tone it down. I just wanted to share with you guys, okay, first of all, Kyle, thank you for explaining the difference between traffic and number of networks connected. If you look at, this is an example of one of the, they call themselves Africa's largest peering community, and well, the numbers seem to indicate the same. They've got about 430 networks peering in their internet exchange point. 1,000 ports, basically. The ports are those locations on the switch where you connect. They have 5 different locations where they are peering, and these are some of their traffic graphs. If we are to step away from the number of peers, like we mentioned, we still have we have only 28 peers in Uganda at the moment, but we expect that these are going to grow, obviously, when we start opening up the nature of how the peering happens, and that's part of the advantage of being in an environment that's scalable. If you look at what they're doing in like just Durban alone, in the exchange point in Durban, the amount of traffic they're exchanging there is almost what we're exchanging in Uganda. Well, much as it's not the most important factor to consider in terms of success of an IX, but it's something to look at as well. If you look at the amount of traffic that they are passing through the entire Internet Exchange Point as Terraco, is about, would you call this 100 times the size of Uganda's traffic?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 100 times. Now, this is South Africa pretty much, but of course they have these big deployments that we're talking about. We should be able to see some kind of crazy growth on our switch fabric when we start getting these big deployments in the country. What does that really mean for you? First of all, it forces internet service providers to be innovative on how they position their products. If you have a lot of these servers locally, then an internet service provider should be in a position where they can say, we shall zero rate your access to this kind of content. You know, like I think telcos so far have been able to do a lot of these WhatsApp, the WTF services, WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook services, where they can give you that for free, especially for like campuses. I believe some of the fixed providers are zero rating like Netflix traffic. I know about Rock because I spent quite a few years there. But like Netflix, Rock will give you free weekends and free nights because that's when you're using things like Netflix. So if you can get that from even from a liquid telecom or so, it helps you because you can manage your bundle better. Now, for all those things to work with ease, you need the service provider, for starters, needs to be able to manage their own cost towards these kind of destinations or these providers. So what advantages we start to see is that you get a better experience at low cost or no cost, because the service providers can now afford to actually give you this type of flexibility because all this content is available locally. Now what that does is that it triggers utilization. You think about a situation like this, if we had all these big content providers in the country during this lockdown, the amount of traffic that should be pushing out of home should be in these kind of levels, as you can see, because probably all the guys in South Africa right now are working from home. And they're also able to access all this content from home and watch all the movies in the world. Gaming as another example of things that generate a lot of traffic and they're very sensitive to what we call latency, that is the speed of connectivity. So these IXPs bring a massive advantage because a gaming provider will be able to get closer to the user and then give them a better experience, because then if you're playing, I just saw that Fortnite is giving out some free credits today for you gamers who might be out there. If you're playing a game like Fortnite and you don't have a local exchange point and then you have a slow link, like maybe a mobile link that's not working efficiently, you find that you're in a situation where you're trying to shoot a guy and probably he has already disappeared because your link is slow. And that kind of like really defeats the purpose of being able to do online gaming, so to speak.
All right. Thank you very much, James and Kyle. Any final words? We're almost approaching the 1 hour mark. As I look out for any feedback from those who are watching.
Well, I'll go fast. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, like we've been saying over time, we're building this data center not just to sort of really improve the quality of experience of internet in Uganda, but also to provide room for growth of all the facets that come with the internet. But ultimately, the improvement of internet in Uganda is not really for the enterprises or the service providers, but rather for the end user. So if the quality of experience is not great for the end user, it's pointless to improve the core or the backbone. So usually, like when we have these kind of conversations, a lot of SMEs are thinking, how does this really benefit me? You've told me all this technical jargon and all that. random stuff, but how does it ultimately change my life? One is we all want cheaper internet. More importantly, we all want internet that works. I think this, if anything, we've learned from this pandemic is that price is really not everything. It's being able to actually utilize the internet, being able to participate in these calls, being able to watch your movies, being able to join house party in the night and actually like be in a community, being able to stream mixtapes on weekends and have a party of one, all these different things that we used to disregard in terms of quality of internet are becoming much more important. And most importantly is being able to do business on the run, being able to do business on the go. A few people have been able to have very little interruption in their work life because they probably have the right setup, right? Some people, it's been a total, it's been a nightmare because either you're in a location which has bad coverage or you have just, what do you call it? Yeah, a wrong fair use policy from your service provider. All these different things to be able to be resolved, we require all the points in the internet curve to be addressed. But the role we want to play is to make sure that the core of the internet, the storage part of the internet, the cross-connection part of the internet is addressed. And one of the biggest plays or the biggest moves we could have was to partner with the Internet Exchange Point, because that there is the heartbeat of local internet. So yeah, thanks guys for watching us. Kyle, I guess you can get Kyle to wrap that.
I think you said it well. Like I said in the press release, I do think this is a milestone in the development of Uganda's internet ecosystem. When countries reach the point where they have a healthy internet exchange point and they have a carrier-neutral data center, if you put the two together, what you typically see is a rapidly accelerating growth pattern. And I fully expect that that's what we're going to see here. So we're really excited by this whole thing on so many levels, and I'm looking forward to deployment.
Right. Thank you very much, Kyle. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much to all the viewers, and apologies again for starting late. We do believe that this Raxio Hour will lead into more education, because there's a lot of education we're doing on the market, and we do look forward to more benefits going down to the consumer. And as you said, this is not only for the enterprise customer, but the customers under them. And so all Ugandans will benefit from this in one way or the other. Thank you so much, and we'll be closing this off. Thank you for your time, and have a nice weekend.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, I think we'll put the video up online, and then you can ask extra questions. I see one of our customers here actually writing something. I'm just going to read through it quickly. He said he's setting up our storage needs for information at Raxio. We have an estimate by which our data will be accessed faster, like 10%, or, well, I don't think there is an exact number right now. It comes down to a bunch of things, which is basically your service provider, the amount of bandwidth, if you're doing cross-connect in-house, also how the whole thing will play. I think it's not a straightforward question that has a straightforward answer, but I would say maybe I could try and work out what would be a logical improvement, but that also depends on where you are right now. So it's a case of faster depending on what, as compared to what. So I think we'll just chat about this a bit more.
It's possible to do an analysis to figure out stuff like that, but it's not something you can easily answer. The other benefit for the person who wrote the question may be cost. There may be significant cost benefits for them depending on how much of their traffic is local. And that's something that can be assessed as well, but requires some insight into their current status. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.
Thank you. Likewise.